Time now for perspective. And in the 3 weeks since the outbreak of war in Ukraine, more than 3 million people have been forced to flee their homes to seek refuge abroad. The mass exodus has prompted comparisons with previous conflicts, the UN among those pointing out that Europe is facing its worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. Well, to discuss this and more, I'm joined by Maggie Paxson, writer, anthropologist and performer. Maggie, you're the author of The Plateau. It tells the story of a group of French villagers who offered refuge to people who are fleeing the Second World War. Tell us, what inspired you to tell that story?
Well, frankly, I was looking for examples of societies that understood something about how to protect others, vulnerable people in the world, how to resist the call to violence, even when the call to violence was very powerful, and who could therefore show me something about how to create a more peaceful world. There's an example of this that I learned about over the years. There was some sort of intimation that my family had a connection with this story. And I'm an anthropologist who spent a lot of time in Russia actually doing my PhD, and then my PhD research, and then writing a dissertation in a book about a little community in Russia, in a village that resisted the powerful people to do what it wanted to do. So I thought, what if I took this example of this place to try to understand it? To have sort of something to look forward to look up to and analyze. And this led me to going to this place, learning about the long history of, the long tradition, in effect, of protecting vulnerable outsiders. It goes back hundreds of years in this place. And that continues to today. So in the course of writing this book, I was able to see, not only to imagine what it would have been like in the past, to do this sort of thing, but what it would have been like and what it is like right now to be taken in and to be welcomed. And in fact, I literally just got back from my first visit to the Chambon since this book came out. And the first thing that I learned was that staying right in the place where I was staying was a Ukrainian family that had been welcomed with open arms, along with several other families.
So are Ukrainian families there already? Apart from that, what kind of parallels do you think can be drawn with the current situation in Ukraine, with all those millions of people now who are trying to flee the country?
Well, the 1930s and 40s were a moment like this. They were a moment when the world was in chaos. A lot of people were moving around, a lot of political movements, a lot of violence, a lot of unpredictability, a lot of terror. And in that way, you see a situation then where just to be kind of a regular, kind of a decent person was a huge task. It was a huge, brave thing to do because it had consequences. So when these people, as a collective on the Plateau Vivre-Lignon and Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, where the action of this book takes place, they were doing regular things that you would do to welcome outsiders, but it was at the risk of their lives. People lost their lives for doing this regular thing. And so the parallels to today, I mean, what needs to be said? I mean, we are in a moment where there are people in flight. We are in a moment where there is violence. We're in a moment where there are extreme ideas that are capturing the attention of people and causing them, say, to become extremer versions of themselves. So it's very sort of, it's of a piece with how they would do this in the past, what they're doing today. But it's also something that I think we can do in other parts of the world, to be able to, in that moment of truth when we're seeing a stranger, how to not see them as a stranger, but see them as a friend. And that's the kind of key, how to do that.
I mean, you've worked also, as you say, in villages in northern Russia. You're a fluent Russian speaker. How do you think that current events are being viewed by people who are living perhaps outside the large urban centres in Russia?
Well, in some ways, it's hard to say. I mean, I am a social scientist, and so I don't like to say things that I don't know. And I haven't been to Russia in a while. My own work there got quite difficult. My first work was in the north of Russia, and then I went into the Caucasus, which had a lot of violence in it. And I eventually stopped going to Russia. But what I learned in general from villagers in Russia was that they had the capacity for a great heart, great morality, great community, great compassion. It was revelatory for me to see that these people who'd lived through terrible things in their lifetime. I mean, Russia had a horrible century, a violent and painful and terrible century, where they also had some things that they're very proud of, like their role in the Second World War. So what I know about rural Russians is that they are capable of great compassion. I also know that they receive certain kinds of information from the state, and they respond to that information from the state, and that's a very powerful source. So I don't know how they're responding, but I imagine that some of what their government tells them and how it explains to them what's going on, that resonates with them. So that's unfortunate. But fortunately, I know them. Like, I was an American going there. I was an American going there when things weren't completely easy between the United States and Russia. And they saw me as a human being. They saw me as a human being in certain ways, like in Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, people are able to see outsiders as human beings. So I know that capacity exists. So basically, I want to hope for the best, that our common humanity and, in effect, our common capacity to understand the fundamental oneness of humanity will win, even in this case.
Maggie Paxson, writer, anthropologist and performer, thank you so much for being with us here at France 24 this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.